This is the Marshall Memo, a weekly roundup of important ideas and research in K-12 education. I'm Mike Dowdy with the audio version of Marshall Memo number 715 for December 11th, 2017. First, the quotes of the week. Quote, "Be cognizant that the only way in which one can close achievement gaps is for students who are behind to grow faster than students who are ahead. If all students continue to grow at equivalent rates in the future, achievement gaps will persist in perpetuity." That's from John Gatta in item number 7. Quote, "How can a highly supervised child be transformed into an independent learner?" That's from Rebecca Mead in Two Schools of Thought, Success Academy's Quest to Combine Rigid Discipline with a Progressive Curriculum in The New Yorker, December 11, 2017. Quote, "Most of what we learn in life we learn from the company we keep. What is taught didactically is often forgotten." That's from Deborah Meyer, also quoted in the New Yorker item listed above. Quote, "Implicit biases persist and are powerful determinants of behavior precisely because people lack personal awareness of them." That's from David Gublar in item number 2. And finally, quote, "School leaders and other professional development facilitators must make clear to novice teachers that their competence is not being questioned when we ask them to engage in critical reflection." That's from Sherry Deckman in Managing Race and Racing Management, Teachers' Stories of Race and Classroom Conflict, in Teachers College Record, November 2017. Item number 1, Supporting Teens Facing Disrespect and Sexual Harassment. In this article in Usable Knowledge, Richard Weisbord and Allison Cashin of Harvard Graduate School of Education / Making Caring Common say that disrespectful sexualized interactions and sexual harassment are, quote, "stunningly common in young people's lives, in the music and media they consume, in school hallways and classrooms, and on college campuses. They're happening among our children, and we are doing shockingly little about it." Specifically, 72% of male students and 80% of female students told researchers they had never had a conversation with their parents about how to avoid sexually harassing others, and similar percentages had never had conversations about various forms of disrespect and harassment. Weisbord and Cashin suggest 6 ways parents and educators can talk to teens about these issues. Define the problem. Many young people don't have a clear picture of what harassment looks and sounds like. They need specifics to help them establish clear boundaries in their minds, to understand, for example, that comments on someone's clothes or appearance can be unwanted, that catcalling, which many men think is a form of flattery, is frightening and infuriating to many women, and that even if words or behaviors are meant to be funny, they may scare and offend others. Step in when you hear a sexist or degrading comment and stick with it. Too many adults don't say anything when young people use language that offends them. Quote, "Passivity not only condones these comments," say Weisbord and Cashin, quote, "it can also diminish young people's respect for us as adults and role models. Even if teens can't absorb or act on our words in the moment, they often still register our words and internalize them as they mature. It's a good idea to think through what you might say if you hear words like bitch or hoe, and how you'll respond if kids say, 'we were just joking,' or 'you don't understand.' Don't give up easily. Work to build young people's empathy for others. And this isn't just a male-to-female problem." Quote, "Sometimes girls and young women in particular can demean and undercut each other in the context of romantic and sexual relationships," say Weisbord and Cashin. Teach kids to be critical consumers of media and culture. Many teens have never critically examined the online and entertainment waters in which they are immersed 24/7. Teachable moments occur when we're with young people and listen to song lyrics or hear news reports. In some cases, it's effective for adults to share their own experiences with harassment or disrespect. Talk about what kids should do if they're a target. Teens need strategies to deal with everything from a friend jokingly calling them a slut or a bitch to being sexually harassed by a stranger. Ask young people about their experience and reactions so far, what worked and what didn't, and how they might respond to hypothetical scenarios. They need to think through whether they should confront perpetrators, get support, tell a teacher or school counselor, or talk to a parent or other respected adult. Role-playing can be very helpful. Encourage and expect upstanding. When teens witness harassment and disrespect, they have the advantage of understanding peer dynamics and being more credible than adults. But first, they have to have the courage and wisdom to intervene. Quote, learning to be an, quote, upstander is a vital part of becoming an ethical, courageous person, say Weisbord and Cashin. Quote, yet upstanding can be risky. Perpetrators can turn on upstanders. That's why it's important to brainstorm strategies with young people that protect both them and the victim. Again, role-playing can provide practice at using words, gestures, and body language. And finally, help kids build a broad base of recognition and self-worth. The most vulnerable teens are those who are highly dependent on romantic and sexual attention, who crave peer approval, and who have lower social status or are part of a marginalized group. This can include LGBTQ youth. Kids need to build skills and a sense of efficacy in academics, the arts, sports, service, student government, and other activities. They might also decide to take collective action against harassment and degradation, which can be another source of self-worth. This is from What Parents Can Do to Stop Sexual Harassment by Richard Weisbord and Allison Cashin in Usable Knowledge, October 18, 2017. Item number 2, unconscious biases in the classroom. Quote, implicit biases persist and are powerful determinants of behavior precisely because people lack personal awareness of them, says David Gublar of the University of Iowa in this Chronicle of Higher Education article. People know that behavior can be affected by unconscious attitudes and stereotypes. They just don't think the problem applies to them. Quote, but we do have implicit biases, says Gublar, every one of us, and as faculty members, it's imperative we try to take them into account. Gublar describes the unconscious way biases can be formed. In a hypothetical world in which 80% of national political leaders are men, 95% of prominent business leaders are men, 70% of recognized scientists and engineers are men, and 85% of police officers are men, wouldn't it be natural for people to associate the masculine with authority? Quote, under these circumstances, asks Gublar, quote, wouldn't you, all else being equal, see a man as more qualified than a woman? The repeated exposure to stereotypes is precisely how implicit bias is formed, and may hold the key to how it can be erased. That hypothetical world, of course, is the one in which we live, and there are other patterns in our world that can shape unconscious biases. For example, the observation that many students from certain demographic groups struggle academically compared with white and Asian students. Without being aware of it and perhaps contradicting our professed values, we may make assumptions about the future performance of each group. As teachers, says Gublar, quote, we function as institutionally backed authority figures. We evaluate students, make judgments, create rules, and often decide who gets to speak and when. If we are serious about our responsibility to create a classroom environment in which every student has an equal opportunity to excel, we need to take a hard look at our own behavior. We may never be completely aware of our own implicit biases. But by assuming that we hold at least some of the pernicious stereotypes that our cultures have handed down to us, we can take steps to counteract them. Patricia Devine at the University of Wisconsin-Madison has developed a workshop in which she helps instructors come to grips with unconscious biases and then use 3 techniques to address them. Stereotype replacement. You recognize and label a biased behavior or thought and replace it with a non-prejudicial response. Counter-stereotypic imaging. You imagine examples of people who defy the stereotypes of their groups. Perspective taking. You try to adopt the worldview, walk in the shoes of a person in a marginalized group. One very simple classroom change is what Gublar calls the, quote, progressive stack. During class discussions in which a number of students raise their hands to participate, make a point of calling on students from marginalized groups first. Quote, without that conscious intervention, he says, quote, what you think of as a fair distribution of speakers may just be the furtherance of an unhealthy social dynamic. The privileged kids feel free to speak, while the marginalized students stay silent. This is from Yes, You Have Implicit Biases Too by David Gublar in the Chronicle of Higher Education, December 8, 2017. Item number 3, dealing with the desire to be liked. In this article in The Cut, Carrie Ram writes about her, quote, deep-seated, seemingly unshakable need to be liked by everyone she encounters. Checking in with friends, she's found that this is a pretty common affliction. It's not very helpful to tell yourself it doesn't matter if people like you, says Ram. better to heed advice she's gathered from psychologists. Think of yourself as a Rorschach ink blot. Quote, what a person sees says more about them than it does the ink blot, says Roger Coven, a clinical psychologist and author of The Need to Be Liked. Quote, and the same thing is true interpersonally. The very qualities that make you likable to one person are the exact same qualities that will make you unlikable to another person. Confidence can be seen as bossiness, honesty as rudeness, hilarious jokes as annoying. The key variable psychologists have found is how much your ink blot is like the other person's. Quote, like attracts like, says Rahm. Quote, or, perhaps more accurately, like likes like. And while you can control your side of a conversation, you can't control the personality or the preferences of the person on the receiving end. Consider all the things you don't know. Quote, someone might be having a bad day at work or a bad week at home, or they might just be distracted by a growing to-do list and eager to turn their attention back to it, says Rahm. Or they might just be hungry. Quote, all, again, are factors beyond your control and likely beyond your knowledge. And while they may influence how people respond to you, they're not about you. Sometimes it's soothing to remind yourself of your own relative insignificance. Pinpoint your biases. All of us have what psychologists call, quote, cognitive distortions, problematic thought patterns as we interact with others. Some examples: mind reading, assuming another person is thinking negative thoughts about you; personalizing, making something about you when it isn't; catastrophizing, imagining the worst case outcome. We're mostly unaware of these thought patterns, but they can generate a lot of anxiety. The key to overcoming them is being aware of what's going on in our heads. Quote, pay attention to where your mind goes during and after conversations, Rahm suggests. Quote, and then be honest with yourself about anything that may have skewed your perception of what took place. Remember the difference between negative and neutral. Plenty of totally neutral encounters, the other person is minding their own business or texting, end up being interpreted as negative. This is especially common among people who are high in, quote, rejection sensitivity, anxious that others are going to shut them out. Do the math. Rahm conjectures that about 30% of the people on the planet, if they got to know us, wouldn't like us. So the chances of running into some of those people in everyday life are very high. Servers in restaurants, clerks in a bank, people at work. Quote, you're going to be disliked by people, she concludes. A lot of people. And that means there's nothing left to do but suck it up. Just tell yourself the odds are crushingly against you. This is from How to Get Over the Need to Be Liked by Everyone You Meet by Carrie Rahm in The Cut, November 8th, 2017. Item number 4, which students have a growth mindset and which don't. In this Brookings research paper, Susanna Claro and Susanna Loeb report on a study assessing growth mindsets in 125,000 California students in grades 4 through 7 in 5 school districts. The researchers measured students' mindset based on their responses to these statements. My intelligence is something that I can't change very much. Challenging myself won't make me any smarter. There are some things I'm not capable of learning. If I am not naturally smart in a subject, I will never do well at it. For each question, students answered not at all true, a little true, somewhat true, mostly true, or completely true. The researchers came to 3 major conclusions. Students in all subgroups who had a growth mindset scored higher on standardized tests of reading and math and had bigger learning gains each year than otherwise similar students who didn't have a growth mindset. Claro and Loeb estimated that the difference made by having a growth mindset versus a neutral mindset was the equivalent of 19 days of learning, almost a calendar month of school. Girls had more of a growth mindset than boys up to 7th grade, at which point the mindset gap began to close. Traditionally underserved students, those living in poverty, English learners, Hispanics, and African Americans, were less likely to have a growth mindset than students not in those subgroups. Quote, while this study is just a first step in assessing the effects of mindset on a large population of students and the role of schools in building mindset, conclude Claro and Loeb, quote, the findings provide initial evidence that it may be beneficial to monitor the levels of growth mindset in the population and convey to students that the brain is malleable. This is from New Evidence That Students' Beliefs About Their Brains Drive Learning by Susanna Claro and Susanna Loeb in Brookings Research, November 9th, 2017. Item number 5, Note-Taking 101. In this article in Edutopia, John Rich of Delaware State University says that when students take notes and study them in specific ways, they think about the class content at a more conceptual, metacognitive level, and retention improves. He suggests 6 strategies for taking notes and making the best use of them after class. Organize the blank page. Students should draw a vertical line about a third of the way across each sheet and take notes in the wider column, leaving the narrower one blank. After class, they should use the left-hand column to create questions to quiz themselves on the class notes. Questions shouldn't be merely factual, but apply to the content or link it to other resources. Pen beats laptop. Research has shown that taking notes in longhand involves deeper processing than computer note-taking. Quote, typing on a device tends to be mere transcription, says Rich, quote, while longhand involves summarizing and interpreting. Use abbreviations for speed. Shortcuts for frequently used words, B/C for because and chem for chemistry, save writing time and allow students to capture more of the content as it's delivered. Make use of the margins. If students have comments or questions during instruction, they should jot them on the edges of their note-taking pages so they can save working memory for what's being said in class and then come back to their queries later. Link class content to the textbook and outside reading. The more connections students make between what's presented and discussed in class and material they're reading outside class, the better their recall and understanding will be. Put in the time. There's a big payoff in reviewing notes after class and answering the questions in the left-hand column. In an aside, Rich describes a study by William Balch in which students in 2 sections of the same college course were given different messages about an upcoming exam. One section was told that the exam would be all multiple choice, the other that it would consist of short answer and essay questions. In the end, both sections were given a multiple choice exam. But students who thought they were going to have to write out their answers outperformed those who prepared for a multiple choice test. Students preparing for a multiple choice test worked on memorizing facts and terms, while those preparing for written answers studied to understand and process content at a higher, more conceptual level. Intriguingly, those who studied for a higher purpose were able to do better on a less cognitively demanding test. This is from 6 Strategies for Taking High-Quality Notes by John Rich in Edutopia, October 2nd, 2017. Item number 6. Why set individual versus aggregate student improvement goals? In this article in School Administrator, John Gatta of ECRA Group is critical of school improvement goals pegged to a general proficiency target. For example, increasing the percentage of 4th graders meeting standards by 5%. What's wrong with goals like this, which seem specific and concise and track progress toward the long-term goal of raising the proficiency of all students? Gatta sees 3 problems. General goals don't take into account demographic shifts, cohort effects, and variations among different groups of students. They're arbitrary and unrelated to how individual students are doing. They may mask progress or lack thereof on specific improvement efforts, for example, students at the upper or lower range of achievement. Gatta believes school improvement goals should be set with these criteria in mind. Focus on student growth. Quote, to scientifically and equitably assess improvement efforts, he says, quote, one must focus on measuring student growth, not aggregate improvements in proficiency. Because of this insight, student growth, quote, is likely to become a significant factor in school accountability under ESSA for the majority of states. Generate individual goals. Schools can estimate each student's likely trajectory based on past performance and then challenge students to surpass those targets. Aggregate goals can be set for any subgroup of students and assessment data used to make decisions on how resources should be used to the greatest effect. Make goals simple and meaningful. In the end, it's all about each student making progress, and for students who are behind, accelerating the rate at which they are becoming more proficient. Quote, arbitrary targets likely will produce inaccurate inferences regarding the effectiveness of improvement efforts, says Gatta. Don't forget about proficiency. The long-term goal is overall gains in proficiency, and that needs to be kept in mind, says Gatta. Quote, be cognizant that the only way in which one can close achievement gaps is for students who are behind to grow faster than students who are ahead. If all students continue to grow at equivalent rates in the future, achievement gaps will persist in perpetuity. This is from Improvement Goals, Simple, Not Arbitrary, by John Gatta in School Administrator, December 2017. Item number 7, a report from a college classroom in the rural Northwest. In this Chronicle of Higher Education article, Rachel Torr describes her creative writing students at Eastern Washington University. Quote, my students have OCD, PTSD, anxiety, diabetes, depression, sleep disorders, eating disorders, hypertension, sexually transmitted diseases, problems with drugs and alcohol abuse, and parents, siblings, and children who have problems with drug and alcohol abuse. They have been sexually abused in their own bedrooms and kicked out of their homes. They've been told they're stupid, ugly, and hopeless, dyed their hair green, come out as gay, changed their personal pronoun to they. They have been beaten by their fathers, mothers, siblings, cousins, stepfathers, and boyfriends. Quote, my students have been to war. These men and women ma'am me and sit in front of the classroom, never with their backs to the door. My students have student loan, alimony, and car payments. To cover their bills, they have fished commercially, worked construction, milked cows, bucked bales, driven semis, pulled espressos, collected unemployment, and sold their eggs. They have worked in insurance, at call centers, owned their own businesses, and ridden bulls professionally. They have broken many bones. Quote, their sentences have run on and on. They have abused semicolons, neglected commas, and used words that don't exist in English. They have crafted images that stay with me for years and notice things I've missed in books, even those I've reread frequently. Sometimes when I go over their personal essays, I can't hold in a small whimper, can't stanch a few silent tears. I rally and focus instead on craft, showing them on the page ways they can make their prose stronger. We're not doing therapy here, I say. This is work. Quote, I refer to the people who take my classes using the possessive because I feel responsible to and for them, though often I wish I knew less about their lives. My impotence in the face of their trials shames me. When I get irritated because they fail to show up for class, don't do the homework, or skimp on proofreading, I try to remember that as much as I know about them, there's even more I don't know. Quote, my colleagues and I, out there in the provinces and far from ivory towers, are building citizens who can read and write, think and analyze, ferret out alternative facts, and distinguish real news from fake. Doing this work feels good when it's not breaking my heart. This is from What I Know About My Students by Rachel Torr in the Chronicle of Higher Education, December 8, 2017. Item number 8, Guidance for Educators and Parents on Educational Apps. In this New York Times article, Tara Hale quotes Ellen Wartella, a director of the Center on Media and Human Development at Northwestern University. Quote, there really does need to be some sort of good housekeeping seal of approval to say that this is a good app, but we don't have that yet. While we wait for authoritative guidance, Hale suggests that teachers and parents apply these criteria when appraising apps that claim to be educational. Does it have clearly defined measurable objectives that build on existing skills? Does it connect new learning to existing learning? Can kids transfer what they learn to real life? Does it actively engage the child? Is it fun? Is it empowering for kids? Is it an active versus passive experience? Does it have features that make it socially interactive? Is it adaptive, adjusting to errors and giving feedback as kids play with it? Does it have distractions that interrupt the learning experience? Quote, when an app is well designed with a clear goal to support a skill and clear target audience, says Jessica Taylor Petrowski of the Center for Research on Children, Adolescents, and the Media at the University of Amsterdam, quote, and really relies on these principles of being active, engaged, meaningful, and socially interactive, it works. It absolutely works. But some of these apps are playful experiences that enable creativity and problem solving, and they can be just as valuable. Hale goes on to suggest several questions that educators and parents should ask about apps as they pick and choose from hundreds of possibilities. Does the app seem right for its users? This involves watching kids playing with the app and seeing where it falls on the continuum from serious learning to just play. Who created it? Pretty much anything from PBS is going to be high quality, says Hale. With other companies, see if educators were involved in the development process. Big names like Disney and Nickelodeon don't always produce good educational apps, while some little-known companies like TinyBop have some excellent products. Trust the experts. Common Sense Media is a good source of information on apps, says Hale. Children's Technology Review also does helpful reviews, often including video clips of the app in action. Does it have advertising or in-app purchases? PBS apps are free with no strings attached, but others support themselves with commercial links. Poptrica, for example, is a fun app with some educational content, but it can seem like, quote, one long advertisement for Kellogg's brand cereals, says David Hill, chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics Council on Communications and Media. Some apps offer a freemium app that lets users download a partial version to try before paying for the full-featured version. Does the app protect children's privacy? Be wary of apps that ask for too much information on a child. Products for children under 13 should be compliant with the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA. But anonymity is a double-edged sword, warns Hale. Quote, in social apps, complete anonymity can open the door to bullying if kids don't feel accountable for their words. Does the app make it easy to report abuse? RoboLocks is an example of an app with multiple safeguards for kids. Does the app do something only an app can do? Flashcards and worksheets are a waste of technology. A good app should, quote, bring to life an experience that's impossible to create off-screen, says Christine Elgersma of Common Sense Media. Examples include these Tiny Bop apps: the Earth, Robot Factory, Space, Skyscrapers, and the Human Body. Another good one is Homer, a literacy app that allows kids to send their creations to approved family members and educators. Everything in moderation. How much app playing is too much? Quote, it's a question of balance over the course of the day, says Wartella, who recommends technology-free zones such as mealtimes and bedtimes. The American Academy of Pediatrics has a personalized family media use planning tool at healthychildren.org. App use should make room for physical activity, homework, reading, and social interactions, and, of course, eating and sleeping. Co-play. There is some evidence that when children use an app with another person, there are more benefits than from solo use. When parents or teachers use an app with a child, there are additional benefits. Quote, a parent can really be a bridge to transfer any learning an app has to the real world, so it's not isolated to a screen when the tablet cover is closed, says Elgersma. Quote, co-use and co-play. That is one of the most powerful ways that apps can be educational. From her informal network of parents and educators, Hale recommends several apps: Raz Kids, Dragonbox, Starfall, Bedtime Math, IXL apps, Scribblenauts, Endless Alphabet, Spelling City, Tumble Books, Epic, and ABC Mouse. This is from How to Decide Which Educational Apps Make the Grade by Tara Hale in the New York Times, December 7th, 2017. Item number 9, Personalized Learning, Preliminary Findings from a RAND Study. In this Education Week interview, Benjamin Harold summarizes his interview with RAND Corporation research Laura Hamilton, John Payne, and Elizabeth Steiner, who are in the middle of a major study of personalized learning in schools funded by the Gates Foundation. The big takeaways so far? The research behind personalized learning is incomplete. There are some positive results in these schools, but, quote, the evidence base is very weak at this point, says Payne. Not robust enough to draw conclusions about how personalized learning practices will work in other schools. There isn't a clear consensus on a definition of personalized learning. There is agreement among advocates on increasing the focus on meeting individual students' needs, creating learner profiles, and using technology to get students moving on to new material only when they've mastered the precursors, as compared to a rigid pacing schedule geared toward grade-level standards. Beyond that, there are many different approaches to personalized curriculum materials, classroom organization, the teacher's role, student grouping, and how mastery is defined. There are real practical constraints. Time is the biggest challenge, especially given that teachers are on the hook to create a lot of materials needed to make personalized learning work for students with varying reading levels, skills, and background knowledge. In addition, how can teachers orchestrate collaboration when students are working on different lessons on different schedules? And how can they be sure all students will learn everything in the curriculum and graduate with the knowledge and skills they need to be successful in the future? Still, there are reasons to be encouraged. The theoretical underpinnings of personalized learning models make sense, says Payne. The experiments need time to play out. The worst fears about personalized learning are overblown. Classrooms where students work in isolation, staring at computer screens with headphones clamped on their heads, are not that common, say the RAND researchers. More typical, says Steiner, is an, quote, ever-changing classroom organization where the teacher is sometimes working with large groups and sometimes working with small groups or individuals, and technology plays a role in that. In addition, fears about too much collection of student data haven't been realized. The RAND team's bottom line advice is, wait for current research to be completed and don't lose sight of the bigger picture of effective instruction. Quote, there's a lot of focus on the shiny new parts of personalized learning, like the technology, says Steiner. Quote, but there are a lot of other things that go into making a good school, and those should not fall by the wayside. By those, she means establishing a shared school-wide vision and building an effective team of educators who enjoy working together. This is from 6 Key Insights. RAND Corporation researchers talk personalized learning. Benjamin Harold interviews Laura Hamilton, John Payne, and Elizabeth Steiner in Education Week, November 8, 2017. You've been listening to the audio version of Marshall Memo number 715 for December 11, 2017. Copyright 2017 Marshall Memo, LLC. If you have feedback or suggestions, please email kim.marshall48@gmail.com.